All right, everyone, we're following big breaking news today. Senator Kamala Harris of California has suspended her presidential campaign. She is dropping out of the race. It was reported earlier by a number of outlets that she had been contacting aides, telling them that she would be withdrawing and posting an announcement today. We now have that announcement on Medium. She says in part, "I've taken stock and looked at this from every angle, and over the last few days have come to one of the hardest decisions of my life. My campaign for president simply doesn't have the financial resources we need to continue. I'm not a billionaire. I can't fund my own campaign, and as the campaign has gone on, it's become harder and harder to raise the money we need to compete. In good faith, I can't tell you, my supporters and volunteers, that I have a path forward if I don't believe I do. So to you, my supporters, it is with deep regret, but also with deep gratitude, that I am suspending my campaign today." So again, Kamala Harris officially suspending her campaign, dropping out of the race for the presidency. And joining us to discuss is our own Jamal Simmons, host of Whisk and also What America's Thinking. Great to see you, sir.
Hey, good to see you on a big day in politics.
So first reactions to this news.
Yeah, listen, I think a lot of people in the country were very positive about Kamala Harris. They looked at her as somebody who was a big shining light in the party, a big chunk of the party. I think she was probably one of the people who had a wide berth of people who really felt positively like she had a lot of chance to do something big in the campaign. That chance dissipated over a period of months, and people felt as if like she wasn't quite living up to the expectations she had in the beginning. Remember, she had a 20,000 person rally when she announced in Oakland.
Yeah.
That was a huge, huge day. So I think a lot of people are disappointed today.
She had a huge rally. The media gave her a lot of attention, a lot of sort of, favorable coverage, 20,000 people there. And then, as the light began to shine brighter on her, she equivocated on several positions. There was the big moment with Joe Biden at that first debate where she challenged him on his history of busing.
Sure.
It landed really effectively, but then after the fact, she sort of equivocated on what she thought. The whole thing seemed a little bit prepackaged. She had the t-shirts ready, she had the Instagram post ready, and that was really the beginning of her decline in the polls, along with the fact that then she had initially backed Bernie. She co-sponsored his Medicare for All bill. She ran Facebook ads saying, "I'm proud to co-sponsor Bernie's Medicare for All bill." She raised her hand saying, "Yes, I would get rid of private insurance." Then she said, "Oh, I misheard the question." She came out with her own plan. And you just over time got this sense that she didn't really know why she was running. She didn't really know who she wanted to be as president. And if you don't know that, then certainly none of America is going to know it either.
That's absolutely right. And I think she did have those moments where she pulled back in these very key moments. Running for president is really hard. I've been through a few of these campaigns myself. And one of the things you have to do is, one, is have a very core central idea about what it is you're up to. But also you got to plan so much further beyond. So think about the day that she came after Joe Biden on that debate stage. She did have t-shirts ready. They did have all the theatrics. But what did she do for the next week? Right. There was nothing that followed that. There was no next moment in the campaign to keep everybody fired up and going. It just sort of the air just sort of kept coming out of the balloon every time she had a big moment. I think that was very tough for her to get back from. And also one other thing, she had a lot of support from Congressional Black Caucus members, Congressional Hispanic Caucus members. I think the campaign saying they had the most endorsements of any campaign from those members. But young African Americans never bought the Kamala Harris campaign. And I remember very early talking to some young students about this, and the first thing they brought up was her criminal justice reform record. And she never was able to find a way around the fact that she was a prosecutor in San Francisco, at a time when people were looking for someone who's going to help people get out of jams dealing with the criminal justice system.
Well, and that was the issue that she was, of course, famously challenged on by Tulsi Gabbard, who came after her for her record. And not only did she not have a response in real time on the stage, she really never was able to formulate a response, because I think it goes to that issue. From the beginning of the campaign, they didn't know whether to lean into that, whether to be sort of apologetic about it. They just didn't know what to say about it. So she tried to spin away from it and say, oh, well, Tulsi's, below my even having to dignify her with a response. But in reality, it was a big issue. We actually have that moment between Kamala Harris and Tulsi Gabbard. Let's take a listen.
As the elected Attorney General of California, I did the work of significantly reforming the criminal justice system of a state of 40 million people, which became a national model for the work that needs to be done.
The bottom line is, Senator Harris, when you are in a position to make a difference and an impact in these people's lives, You did not. And the people who suffered under your reign as prosecutor, you owe them an apology.
And she really never had a response to that. And while she began to decline a little bit after her interaction with Joe Biden, which initially he was hurt by, but kind of had a backlash effect to her, that moment with Tulsi, she never recovered from because she looked weak. She didn't have an answer. She'd already sort of equivocated on Medicare for all. And so it just began to look like a campaign without a core.
Yeah, I think a lot of people in the Democratic Party have a lot of questions about Medicare for all. A lot of people are wondering whether or not the country can afford Medicare for all. You want to take away Obamacare from people. There's a lot of debate happening in the country about whether or not Medicare for all is even an appropriate policy. The problem, though, is once you come out in favor of a policy, you got to stick.
Right.
And then you got to think through what your policy positions are before you announce them in public so that you can stick by them when the attacks come, because you know they're coming.
Well,
and I think that's the
exactly
thing she never recovered from.
Healthcare is the #1 issue for Democratic primary voters. And look, if you do the polling, Medicare for all among Democratic primary voters is overwhelmingly popular. But as you point out, even more important than that, the two top candidates on healthcare are, yes, Bernie Sanders, Medicare for all, wrote the damn bill, got it. But #2 is actually Joe Biden, who stakes out the completely opposite end of the spectrum in terms of healthcare. But he has been there, and he's been there consistently, and people believe that he really is committed to, okay, let's take Affordable Care Act and expand it. And so you can respect that, okay, I see your case for that. I know you're going to fight for it because you've been consistent about it. I really think that's what it boils down to with Kamala Harris. I also think there's a warning here for Elizabeth Warren. And I was looking at the numbers today. Kamala, from her peak, she declined about 12 points in the RCP national average to where she is today. That happened over a period of about 5 months. Elizabeth Warren has actually declined an even greater number of points in that same average, about 13 points, over a much shorter period of time. And she's gotten tripped up over this same issue of healthcare, where she hugged Bernie, she's with Bernie, she's with Bernie, she's with Bernie, and then she spends weeks trying to avoid having to say middle-class taxes. Then she issues the transition plan that really calls into question whether she actually supports Medicare for all at all. And again, it's not even so much about the policy, it's knowing what you stand for, what your priorities are, and what you're going to fight for. When that erodes, everything erodes.
That's the tough part. Here's the one advantage Elizabeth Warren has. She has a lot of money. And one thing Kamala Harris hasn't had recently is a lot of money. She had a big organization with a high burn rate. And this is true of presidential politics as true as it is of anything else. People don't drop out when they run out of ideas. They drop out when they run out of money.
Yeah.
I think she couldn't figure out how to pay for this big operation that she had put in place going forward, Kamala Harris. Elizabeth Warren still has a lot of cash. So she's going to be able to fight this fight. And maybe she can change the subject. Maybe she can find a way to get back in the game after this in a way that Kamala Harris never was able to. What's tougher now is she's got somebody like Mike Bloomberg in who's sucking up so much energy in terms of attention and in terms of putting TV ads on. I think the Kamala Harris campaign sent a note out saying that Mike Bloomberg had spent twice as much money so far than Kamala Harris raised the entire campaign.
It's crazy. We can actually put the presidential preference up. This is our own Hill Harris X polling that shows exactly what you're just saying, Jamal, that look, Mike Bloomberg's jumped up to 6% over Kamala Harris, who'd slipped down to 2%. And I think your point about money is well taken. Of course, momentum and money go together, right? So if you're flagging in the polls, which she has been for any number of months, becomes much harder to get those big donors to part with their checks, gets much harder. She never really ran, not to say she didn't have any grassroots donors, but she didn't really ever run that sort of grassroots money campaign that a Warren or a Sanders or a Yang or a Gabbard even have run. So she was dependent on these big donors, and they want to back a winner. So if you're flagging in the polls, it's going to be hard to pull those checks down.
I do think at a moment like this, it's important to think about not just what went wrong, but some of the good parts. And it'd be great. I think we have some video of her initial campaign rally where she had 20,000 people out. It'd be great to see it if we have it. But she also talked a lot about teacher pay. She talked about middle-class tax cut, which was something that was popular for a bunch of people in the party. And she brought up something in the last debate about maternal health, particularly regarding African-American women. Elizabeth Warren has talked about this a little bit, but she was the one person that brought it up in the middle of the debate. So there are a lot of people who wonder, is there anybody else who's going to be on that stage who's going to be concerned about some of these issues that really impact African American women, and they want to make sure somebody's going to carry that ball forward?
Yeah, to your point, that the high point of the campaign sort of was the launch. 20,000 people. She raises a bunch of money coming right out of the gates. Lots of favorable coverage from the media. We're looking at a primary schedule where California is moved up in the lineup. Okay, you can see you've got all these diverse states where maybe she could have appeal, and then from there things start to peter out. But let's take a look at that rally and what she had to say.
I say we rise together or we fall together as one nation indivisible. And I want to be perfectly clear. I'm not talking about unity for the sake of unity. So hear me out. I'm not talking about unity for the sake of unity. I'm not talking about some facade of unity. And I believe we must acknowledge that the word unity has often been used to shut people up or to preserve the status quo.
When she was great, she was really impressive.
Yeah.
I mean, the first debate, not just that Joe Biden exchange, which she nailed. She nailed that blow perfectly. That girl was me. I mean, she really hit it. That whole debate, she was so on that I looked at that and I said, wow, this woman could be a real contender here. And then the wheels started coming off. Speaking of Joe Biden, we have a reaction in from him that I want to read. His response to Kamala dropping out. And he says, my reaction is she is a first-rate intellect, a first-rate candidate, and a real competitor. I have mixed emotions about it because she is a solid person. We also have a tweet from Cory Booker. He says, my dear friend Kamala Harris is a trailblazer. I've loved serving with her in the Senate, and every moment we've run into one another on the trail. Her campaign broke barriers and did it with joy. Love you, sister.
You know, I've got a theory about the Kamala Harris campaign also. That was a challenge for her. Kamala Harris grew up as a prosecutor. She spent her entire adult life prosecuting.
Yeah.
And one thing when you grow up as a prosecutor, you can prepare your statements,
Yes.
You've got your brief, you know what it is. So when we saw her at those hearings, at the Kavanaugh hearings, and she was going after Kavanaugh. When we saw her on the debate stage and she was going after Biden, these are pre-planned hits. She knew where they were going. She knew how to take them down. The day after, you got to know where you want to lead. And I think she never quite got comfortable getting out of the pre-planned moment and getting into the moment that was maybe a little bit more fluid.
It's funny because my husband is a lawyer and he said exactly the same thing. He said when she's prepared in that first debate, right, where she wasn't yet the front runner, so the scrutiny wasn't on her. She could just throw the jabs and didn't really have to take the incoming. She was at her absolute strongest. The moment you have to sort of freewheel it, she was very much caught off guard. I noticed right away after that first debate when I was genuinely impressed with her performance. You couldn't not be. I mean, she really was on fire. And she did a television interview where suddenly, you know, she's taking incoming, and it was a completely different candidate. I said, how is this even the same person? And I think that was my first hint that there was a real weakness there that could potentially be exploited, which certainly Tulsi Gabbard was able to do.
But here's the thing, if you're Elizabeth Warren or you're Bernie Sanders, you know why you're running for president. Andrew Yang's in the same position, right? You know why you're running for president. You know what this is all about. So it doesn't matter what question people ask you because you've got a fundamental theory of the case about what it is you're arguing. And whatever the question is, you just fit it into your theory of the case.
Right.
If you don't really know what that is,
you're lost.
You're grasping around trying to figure out how to answer this question in the right way that doesn't offend these people too much. I was joking about her health care plan, Kamala Harris's. It was like a little too much salt, but not, a little salt, not too much. A little sugar, but not too much. A little this, a little that.
Yeah.
It was so
you could just tell that she'd gotten the consultants together and read the polling and looked at the crosstabs and came up with the plan based on that rather than what she actually thought the right answer was. And honestly, I have no idea what she thinks the right answer is. And that's as much a part of the problem as anything.
Well, that's the thing about those other candidates that we just mentioned.
Yeah.
You know, if Bernie Sanders goes into a room with a corporate executive or if he's in a room with a worker on a line, he's going to basically say the same thing. Same thing you can argue about Elizabeth Warren. You can probably argue the same thing about Andrew Yang. When Kamala Harris goes in a room, frankly, sometimes when Joe Biden goes in a room, you just don't know what will happen in that room, what they'll argue.
Although, you know, as things shake out, you've had this rise of, as much as Kamala Harris, as much as we thought she might appeal to African Americans, she really never caught traction, as you're pointing out, with that community. So you've had this sort of white, affluent liberal base that shifted from candidate to candidate. They gave Kamala a look. They gave Pete a look early. They're back on Pete now. They gave Warren a look. They seem to be shifting away from her. That really was her constituency. And, you know, the interesting thing is as this all shakes out, it seems like, and this is what I did my monologue on today, it seems like it's starting to come down to a race between these two ideological poles, Biden and Bernie. And as somewhat unpredictable as Biden is, you know what his theory of the case is. Let's go back to the Obama years. Let's just get this guy out and just let things go back to the normal, the way they were in the 90s when I was working with the Republicans. Let's just take the Affordable Care Act and do what we can with it. And you know what Bernie stands for. You know he stands for the complete opposite of that. Let's forge a new era. Let's do things completely differently. Trump is not just, you know, an aberration. He is a symptom of a core rot. And all the other candidates, it's hard to say where they fit on that spectrum, right? They're all, the rest of them seem to be having, like, trying to have a little bit of it both ways. I'm going to be a revolutionary, but I'm going to be a team player. I'm going to be a progressive, but I'm also going to be, you know, the prosecutor. There were these devastating pieces that I'm sure you read in the Times and the Washington Post about Kamala's campaign implosion.
Sure.
One of them had a quote from one of her aides, this gallows humor, where they were saying, you know, we went from Speak Truth Spring to 3 a.m. summer to Justice Winter as they searched around trying to find what landed and what worked. You can't conference call your way to knowing what your core values are.
You can't. And Hillary Clinton did the same thing. Both the 2007 campaign and in 2016, they just shifted around a bunch. I'll put one asterisk on your analysis, but I think has a lot of merit. Is there's something else happening in the electorate, which I think we thought for a long time, at least I thought for a long time, there would be some like kind of a Bernie, Elizabeth Warren wing of the ideology, and there'd be like a Biden, Kamala Harris, whoever in the middle ideology. And it seems like what's happening a little bit is a lot of those Biden voters also seem to kind of be interested in Bernie, and then the same thing, Elizabeth Warren got a bunch of her votes from Kamala Harris, which was not something that I was really sort of expecting when she was on her rise up. I think there's something about tried and true versus sort of like this fresh new, should we take a gamble? And particularly with the older African American voters. With older African American voters, I'll just tell you, they are scared to death that there's nobody who can beat Donald Trump other than an older white guy. And so a big chunk of their affinity for Biden is, you know what, we know who he is, it's not a gamble, and he's an old white guy who takes on another old white guy,
you know what you're getting.
And let's let them have that out.
You know what you're getting.
And we'll argue about what to do next after Election Day.
It didn't surprise me at all that, because if you looked at the crosstabs in the polling, you saw that Kamala and Warren and Pete and Beto and whoever else was flirting with this white affluent liberal. They all have a very similar base, and that's why as Pete has gone up, Warren has fallen. That's been the group that has most been searching around for a candidate. You have older working class voters who are basically with Biden. You have younger voters and younger working class voters who are basically with Bernie. And so all the searching around has been with these white affluent voters that Kamala got a look from. And it's interesting now if you look at whose supporters are the most committed, right? It's Bernie's supporters and Biden's supporters are the most committed. And then way down the list, they're like 70 and 60%. Way down the list, Warren's at maybe the 40s. Pete is at like the 30s and the 20s. So that group is still trying to search around for their JFK or their this year's Obama or whatever it's going to be, right?
You know, Kamala Harris was very popular with African American voters, very popular. What you would hear from people all the time is, I just don't know if this is the right time, and maybe she should be vice president. I heard that in every room that I went into for the last 6 months.
Was fair,
I'm not sure now if that still would hold after her performance, and that's something she has to be concerned about.
That's true.
But 6 months ago, people said, you know what, I'll go with Biden, and let's let Kamala be his vice president, and then she can run after he's done because he's old anyway.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And part of the reporting in the Washington Post in the Times, which, by the way, when you see these pieces, you know things are bad, because this is all aides talking to reporters, trying to throw each other under the bus, trying to protect their own reps, trying to blame this person. It wasn't me. It was their fault. It was the campaign manager, whatever. You always know the wheels are coming off when that happens. But part of the reporting there was that she had until the end of December to get her name off the primary ballot in California, and that if she was on that ballot and she performed really poorly, that would be a very bad thing for her future. And apparently some of her longtime supporters and donors in particular were trying to make that case to her. We can also say one of her aides said that she did a full audit of the campaign before deciding to suspend. They'd already made a series of layoffs after a big launch, being a top-tier contender, building out this big national operation, and then not having the funds to back it up and having to pare back dramatically.
On your point about the California weakness, if Kamala Harris was in the California ballot and she came in at 4th, 5th place, 4, 5, 6% of the vote, somebody somewhere, some state senator, some former mayor of LA, like Antonio Villagrosa, they're looking at this thinking, maybe I got a primary in my future.
Oh, they're already looking at it.
Right?
I'm sure they're already looking at it, but this may help to stave off some of the worst of the damage, because now, of course, all the candidates will have laudatory things to say about her. Memories are very short.
That's right.
You know, you remember the good, maybe some of the not so great moments will fade from memory, but, you know, definitely want to congratulate her on her campaign. You know, I think, as you pointed out, Jamal, she raised a number of issues that were important to have on the stage, and it's already an interesting ride. We'll see where it all goes from here. Jamal, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. It was a big day.
And we will, of course, see you back here tomorrow for Rising. Have a great day.